Level up your LA Kings experience with the new Vivid Seats Elite Seats. All the on-ice Kings action with even more exclusive access. Enjoy great seats to the game along with premier dining inside the Lexus Club with all-you-can-eat food and non-alcoholic beverages. Plus, get a free Team LA Kings item and parking with your purchase. Score your Vivid Seats Elite Seats tickets today and earn rewards on each purchase from the only ticket company that rewards you for buying. Experience it live with Vivid Seats, the official partner of the LA Kings.
You're listening to an LA Kings podcast. For more episodes of this and every other Kings program, visit lakings.com/podcast.
You're listening to All the Kings Men, the official podcast of the LA Kings. Now, here's your host, Jesse Cohen.
Welcome back, Kings fans. I am Jesse Cohen. This is All the Kings Men. The rookie face-off is over. Training camp is here. Game 1 of the preseason is on Monday. Real Hockey Talk is officially back, and we're kicking it off with the top 10 questions facing the LA Kings heading into training camp. Quick heads up, this was recorded before the announcement that Arthur Kaliyev had signed a one-year contract. We knew that information was potentially coming, but we didn't know for sure that it would come before camp or what the details would be. So while we did mention Kaliyev, it's possible he would have factored into our conversations a little heavier had that information come earlier in the week. That being said, training camp should determine a lot and answer a lot of questions, so settle in and enjoy. Kings Hockey is back, Kings fans. All right, it's just time to ask the top 10 questions facing the LA Kings heading into training camp 2024. Here to help me do that, Zach Dooley. How are you doing today, Zach?
Jesse, doing really good. How are you?
I'm good. We're recording this Tuesday morning. The rookie face-off ended yesterday afternoon, last night, I guess, depending on how you want to determine that time of day. And so now we head into the next event on the calendar, and that is training camp. And as we always do, we're going to start asking the big questions. We don't know the answers right now, but these are the biggest storylines to watch for going into training camp. And the first one I think is probably the easiest one, and that is, where will the goalies be assigned at the end of training camp? I think the assumption, barring injury or any other sort of unforeseen event, is that Darcy Kemper and David Riddick will begin the season with the Kings. Eric Portillo and Phoenix Copley will be assigned to the Ontario Reign. And for those who are unaware, the Kings have the Reign have a goalie by the name of Dryden McKay. He is signed to an AHL contract. I imagine he begins the year with the Greenville Swamp Rabbits, although I suppose if he has an incredible camp, maybe it's possible that they keep him in Ontario as a third option.
Here's two things I would point out to add on to that. One, I would expect Carter George to be in main camp as well.
Yes.
He will likely go back to the OHL. He's 18, not eligible to play in the AHL or the ECHL as a CHL player.
But does have an entry-level contract, so
correct.
Technically is available to play in the NHL.
Good play for the Kings if things went that way.
Yeah.
I think we'd all agree he was outstanding at the rookie tournament. Marco Sturm called him his number one win, if you will, from that tournament. We were all really impressed with Carter George, and maybe it'll even get us to watch an OHL game this season. I don't know. Maybe over under 0.5 OHL games for this podcast.
I mean, if I was ever going to, it would be this year.
It would be to watch Carter George play against Liam Greentree. That's my game. The other note is that Phoenix Copley is coming off a long-term injury. Everything I've heard suggests he will be ready to go participating on day one, but that's practice. I don't know about games. So you talk about Dryden McKay, has played some AHL games, 2 full ECHL seasons. He could find himself in the AHL early if Copley isn't 100% ready for game action. Like, that was a serious knee injury he had. He's a freaky athlete. Like, if there was one guy you'd say he's ahead, it'd be Phoenix Copley. Like, he is built a little bit differently, but one thing to watch for is that injury and just kind of where he's at day one and then as camp progresses.
And I feel like this comes up pretty frequently when we have these types of conversations. There's no roster limit in the AHL. So they could, if for whatever reason Copley isn't ready to go, you just hold on to him. But for the moment, those are the goalies under contract. Hampton Slakinski is Western Michigan. So he won't factor into any of these conversations right now. Next question on the list. What will the forward lines be to start the season? And you spoke to Rob Blake earlier in the summer, and at least to start camp, I think we have a pretty clear idea of the ideal or their ideal lines. And it's Laferriere, Kopitar, Kempe, Fogle, Byfield, Fiala, Jeannot, Danault, and Moore, with Lewis, Turcotte, and Thomas, with Fagemo as a 13th forward. So at least to start, at least on day one of camp, I expect that those lines will get some time. I would have zero surprise if that is not the situation by the end of camp.
Totally, right? I mean, that's what camp's for.
Yeah.
We know that Jim Hiller is the coach. We know that Jim Hiller likes to move the pieces around. I would be shocked if the lines went unchanged from day one to game one.
Yep.
Doesn't mean they might not wind back up where they started, but I'd be surprised if there weren't other combinations tried along the way. Like, I think they'll want to see what does Nikhil Thomas do up higher in the lineup, and Alex Turcotte do higher in the lineup. Maybe how does a different piece work with Moore and Danault? How does a different piece work maybe with Byfield and Fiala? Like, I think they're going to move them around at times for sure. And honestly, like when I talked with Rob Blake, that was July too. Who knows? All the meetings these guys have had since, it's possible a piece has changed. So that's what I'm going to go with until I see otherwise for day one. I think we both agree that there's certainly a good chance that that's not necessarily what the lineup is opening night. And we'll see how camp goes. If performance or chemistry dictates it looks better another way.
And over the last few seasons, it was pretty easy, assuming that they had been fully healthy, it was pretty easy to assume that the intended lines, last year were Byfield, Kopitar, Kempe, Arvidsson, Danault, and Moore. But, because there was established chemistry there.
And then it was
a track record.
Kaliyev, right? Just by default. And
but this year we don't have three guys with a track record of success playing together. We have two pairs of two guys with a track record. And then, we hope that Fogle, Byfield, and Fiala form some sort of chemistry. But that's why I say, at the beginning of day one, if they throw those lines out in the first practice and for whatever reason, somebody feels like it's not working or the coaching staff wants to see a different look or whatever. I just wouldn't be stunned if by the end of day one, we have a new combination, because like you said, that's what camp is for, to figure this stuff out.
Even if it does work, there might be 5 configurations of that group that they want to see, and you don't know until you see it. You make a really good point. Like last year, I would have been very confident, barring the injury and suspension that the Kings had, that was going to be the lineup game one.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe not game 82, but game one, that was going to be the lineup. This year, I would say I'm much less confident.
Yeah. And an extension of that is our next question number 3, which is what will the power play look like? We'll get to the blue line in a second, but I've got, Adrian Kempe, Anze Kopitar, Kevin Fiala, and Quentin Byfield, I think, are mortal locks to play power play time. Trevor Moore led the team in goal scoring last year. So even if maybe a year ago he wouldn't have been considered a mortal lock to be on the power play, I would be very surprised if he doesn't see some power play time. Phil Deneau's puck retrieval ability and face-off ability is seen as valuable. So I would expect him on the power play, but then you have Fogle and Laferriere. Assuming 4 forwards per power play unit, that's one too many that I just listed. So
you listed 8 guys.
Oh, did I? I thought I listed 9. Oh, you're right. Okay, well, there you go. So then the question becomes, does somebody like Nikhil Thomas, what if Tanner Jeannot really clicks with Moore and Danault? Do they see value in keeping the 3 of them together as a unit? Do you load up the top 6 forwards and then add, is it just as simple as the top 6 guys plus Danault and more? And then on the defense, we get to that now. Is it Doughty and Clark? Is it Doughty and Spence? Do they put 2 defensemen on one unit? We don't know.
I think I had 2 points, one of which was that, right? It's an idea that you have proposed in the past, and this feels like a year where it should really be considered, right? And Brandt Clarke has to be on the power play to become the best version of Brandt Clarke.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of what makes him good. Drew Doughty scored 15 goals last year. You're going to say, hey man, thanks for scoring all of those goals. Enjoy PP2. We have this young kid. Drew spoke at exit interviews about saying, if Brandt Clarke makes it better, I want him to be in those spots. He's willing to give some stuff up. Maybe you see them together. Clark is kind of unique. He could play different areas. Maybe it's Doughty up top. Maybe Clark could play like a rover kind of role. Or maybe Clark and Spence are both in the second unit because you want 2 defensemen. They're both younger. You'd rather have that safety net of having 2 defensemen on the second unit. So wouldn't be shocked if the Kings use 2 defensemen at some point. Which power play unit it is, I don't know, but have to think that they want all 3 of those guys in the mix, and the only way to do that is to play 2 of them at the same time.
Yeah, this is sort of a consequence of having 3 right shot defensemen all in a similar vein, right? When Matt Green was the 3rd pair right shot defenseman, you didn't have to worry about Matt Green getting power play time. Yeah. It wasn't going to happen. Clark and Spence are both young and early in their careers, and both of them, the ceiling, the blue sky version of Brandt Clarke is better than the blue sky version of Jordan Spence. But that's not because Jordan Spence isn't a player with a ton of potential. It's just because Brandt Clarke is a player with even more potential or perceived potential.
Especially in power play. Scenario, right? I think Spence is a better defender and profiles more of that two-way guy, right? But Clark's offensive gifts are what make him so special, and that's got to include the PP.
But I just don't think you can wave your hand and say, okay, well, Clark and Doughty will get power play time and none for you, Jordan Spence, because Jordan Spence brings value in that role as well.
I agree. One other note that I think is important, and we'll cover this later, is the Arthur Kaliyev of it all.
Yes, yeah.
If he's in the mix, and we're going to talk about him in a little bit, he's a power play guy as well.
Yeah, and the forward lines would be impacted by that as well.
They will. And even if he's, say, on the 4th line, he's a guy who has bumped onto the power play. Yep. The shot is there. He has scored his share of power play goals. If he's in the lineup, power play probably has to be a part of his repertoire as well. So that's another guy to consider who maybe moves somebody else off.
The next question on the list is, what will the defensive pairs be to start the season? I think it's safe to assume that Anderson, Doughty, Gavrikov, Spence, Edmondson, and Clark will be the top, assuming full health and availability, to start the season, or to start camp, I should say. That's what I expect to see. Joel Edmondson has not played a full 82-game season in quite a while, if ever. There are extra defensemen. Englund played, did he play 82 last year?
Played 82.
82. Kyle Burrows played 78, 80, somewhere in that neighborhood.
He played a lot,
Yeah, so there are... I think you and I both are anticipating 8 defensemen on the roster. And so...
Good answer, question 8.
Yeah, well... But like I said, I think the assumption is that Edmondson and Clark and Gavrikov and Spence begin together, but that's same as the forward lines. That doesn't mean anything past day one, really.
So if there's one thing I'm confident in, it is that Anderson Doughty will be a pair.
Yes, that's
injury,
for
that's
sure.
The one. It's okay, I can cement that one.
Yeah, writing that one in pen.
Those other 4 guys are who I would expect, and I think who you'd expect too, if they were to swap Spence, Clark, Gavrikov, Edmondson with each other. Wouldn't be surprised if it became Spence, Edmondson, Clark, Gavrikov, or the other way around. I think we also have to consider when we're talking about defensive pairs, use quotes that you can't see on the podcast, but the Kings played 11-7 a lot last year.
Yeah.
I think they lost once in regulation in like 14 games. I have to look up the exact number, but they had a lot of success record-wise playing 11-7.
Mm-hmm.
The coach is the same who liked playing 11 forwards on certain nights. That jumbles the pairs and lends into, for me at least, why I would say, okay, I look at the 8D, the two guys who you would have as 7 and 8 played 82 and 73 games last year, and they offer something very different than Clark and Spence. I think we could see that from time to time, maybe more than from time to time. So I think that impacts what you might call pairs. If you have 7 guys, one of them is Englund or one of them is Burrows, I think that kind of changes the equation a lot, especially beyond Anderson and Doughty.
Yeah, it's funny. Somebody asked me about the 11-7 recently. Apologies, I don't remember who it was. And my hunch, and this is totally a hunch, haven't talked to anybody about this, this is based on nothing. Last year was an anomaly for a lot of reasons.
Yep.
And so I guess in my mind, the 11-7 was just part of the unique situation that the team found itself in. And so I guess I'm not anticipating it happening again. I guess it wouldn't shock me given how often it did happen last year. But I just always sort of assumed it was very unique to that season. So I guess we'll find out.
I guess we'll find out. And
yeah,
I'm not going to sit here and say I know they're going to play 82 games of 11-7. But
yeah, that would be surprising.
I would probably take, I don't know what the line is, but I might be inclined to take the over. And it's a point that you've brought up to me a couple times, is like, when things get into the crap a little bit, sometimes you revert to things that worked. And, I think we all had our ups and downs with the 11-7 watching it, but it was successful in terms of getting results.
It certainly was.
You can't doubt. So I think it's in the mix and something that we should be on the lookout for in the regular season.
Well, I'll put it on my list of media over-unders.
Put it on your curiosity
yeah.
list.
Next one is which players will be on the penalty kill. And the reason that I formatted these things these ways, forward lines, then power play, defensive pairs, then penalty kill, because you said, Doughty and Anderson are a pair, we can write that in ink. I expect that they'll be on the penalty kill as well.
I would assume so, yeah.
And so then that begs the question of Spence and Clark, who are both, more offensively gifted than defensively gifted. Who's your second, Anderson and Doughty are out there for a minute 15 on the kill. It's time for a change. Who jumps over the boards next? Is it Spence and Gavrikov? Is it Edmondson and Gavrikov? If you're pairing 2 righties on the power play, are you pairing 2 lefties on the penalty kill? If Anze Kopitar's numbers have to get reduced, are you really taking your captain and arguably one of your best penalty killers out of the rotation? Is Phil Deneau going to play power play, penalty kill, and even strength? If so, does that ipso facto make the Byfield line the third line because Deneau's getting more minutes? Does Byfield get penalty kill? I have no idea what the penalty kill will look like other than Doughty and Anderson.
One thing, this is a little bit unrelated, then I'll give a couple thoughts here, is I think that when we talk first line, second line, third line, it's really about 5-on-5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Phil Deneau, if he plays 12 minutes 5-on-5 and Byfield plays 15, but Deneau plays 20 and Byfield plays 18, who played more?
I think it just depends on who's having the conversation, because sometimes I just quickly glance at minutes and I go, oh,
totally.
Blah, blah, blah. And then other times I get in, elbows deep into it and go all right, well, there were 8 minutes of special teams play. And
the problem is a lot of times these conversations go down in 280 characters.
Yes.
And it's hard to talk about that, right? And the narrative becomes, oh, it's just this big number. But in reality, it's a little bit different. The penalty kill to me is really interesting for all the reasons you just brought up. The Kings penalty kill was so good for 82 games and then unfortunately just got shredded for 5. And those were the 5 that mattered. Doughty Anderson in the Edmonton series were not on the ice for a power play goal against. I think the Kings gave up 8 power play goals, and that pair was not responsible for one of them.
Yep.
They're going to have to be probably the top unit PK wise. Gavrikov, with the way that he plays with his stick defensively, he's a PK asset. My guess would be Spence would be the fourth guy. I feel like you want defensemen on their forehand for clears where, you don't want backhand clearing attempts. That leads to delays of game and muffins up the middle. You don't want to do that. But your 4 best equipped defensemen to penalty kill probably include 3 left shots. So I'm interested to see how a Spence or maybe a Clark handles PK minutes. Up front, you'd have to think Danault more stays together, right? Like they always do, and they're both pretty adept at penalty killing. I'll believe that Kopi isn't killing penalties when I see him not doing it.
Right.
But he's 37 and he's your 1C. You've got to manage him a little bit, right? So maybe he's on the PK, but maybe he's not the horse on the PK. Maybe Danault and Moore are taking some of those harder minutes. Kopi and Adrian Kempe factor in. And, I want to see an Akil Thomas kill penalties. I want to see him, if he's the 4C, I want to see him step up. I want to see when Trevor Lewis is in the lineup, I want to see him killing penalties. Like, those are the guys that can eat some of those minutes that are harder to spare your higher offensive players. That's, to me, the one I feel like I know the least about who's going to be on the PK, because there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of options.
I don't think there's a player on the roster other than Fiala and Clark that I would say I would be shocked to see them get significant penalty kill time. Like,
I would love to see Kevin Fiala on the PK too, because they tried it last year in preseason, and it is a fascinating option with what you can do. He has all the tools to be a great PK guy.
I'm not familiar enough with Foegele or Jeannot to know if they are ideal candidates for the penalty kill, but I just wouldn't be stunned. And you mentioned, Kopitar, Kempe, Laferriere,
I've heard he could kill penalty.
Yeah. Obviously more Danault, Lewis, Thomas, Turcotte is an option. So it'll be, again, that's why these questions are here, is because we that's what camp is for.
But I think that's one to look out for, as we got to answer this question, and we probably have the least information on it of all these questions.
So the next question, and since we brought up Alex Laferriere, we'll use that to transition into the next question, number 6, which is who will be the last players cut or, surprise standouts. Every year there's a player, even if they don't make the team like Alex Laferriere does, there's a player who, it's getting down to cut day. Ontario Reign training camp is open, and there's 1 or 2 guys, and you're like, oh, well, I did not expect them to last this long. So the question is, who is that player? Are there any players like that this year? I certainly don't have any candidates that leap to mind, but I'm curious to see if there are any.
I'm going to point to Jeff Malott as a guy who has a little bit to him. 3 20-goal seasons in the AHL, and he's really big. I don't think he's going to come in and play with Kopitar and Kempe, but I feel like he's not a guy who's on many radars, who is maybe closer to the 14th or 15th forward than the 18th or 19th forward, if that makes sense. He's a guy that I think could be more in the mix for one of those bottom of the lineup or, scratch spots than we think, even if it's not off the start. Jack Studnicka has way more NHL games than we maybe talk about, and so does Caleb Jones, for that matter. They both play positions where there's not a path to a roster spot, but Studnicka's got like 125. Jones is over 250. Like, these guys have played in the NHL and are probably currently targeted for Ontario. So those are 3 guys kind of on that bubble who I'd be looking at. As far as like it was Alex Laferriere, it's been Blake Lizotte, it's been Tobias Bjornfoot. I don't think there's like a prospect like that right now who is at that stage in their career, but maybe we would have been sitting there saying the same thing about those other guys, and then they emerge. So I don't have a guy like that personally, but you never know.
The Kings, for the last 2 seasons, really have, maybe even more, done a really good job of populating the middle class range of player. And what I mean by that is guys like Studnicka and Malott, Joe Hicketts, Jacob Uvrari is one where, like, yes, if enough injuries occur or whatever, if for whatever reason you need to call players up from Ontario, there are now, half a dozen guys, if not more, with significant NHL experience that you can play, 4 games. Last season, right, Gavrikov went down and Uvrari was called up and stepped into that spot, played a handful of games, was, did the job needed to be done. And then thank you very much, back, I guess he didn't go back to Ontario, but, so
he does what he does every time, right?
Yeah.
He does exactly what he's asked to do. We know what Mo is, and we know he can play in the NHL.
So this, I think Studnicka is 25 ish. Whereas like Godin and Malott, maybe I think a bit older.
A little bit older, yeah.
So we'll see what happens, with the Kings traveling to Quebec. Excuse me.
Yeah.
It'll be curious to see how many players they take with them, right? In Australia, they took 3 extra forwards, I feel like.
Yeah, I think it was 27 total. 3 goalies, 15 forwards, 9 or 10 D.
Now, that was going to the other side of the planet. Quebec is far, but not as far. Too. Yes.
AHL camp will be underway when the Kings go to Quebec.
So it'll be curious to see. And also the Kings open with 7 road games after the 2 in Quebec. So
yeah,
it's a whole separate situation. But I think a lot will be, you could infer a lot from the decisions made on that Quebec trip. And that'll be at the end of training camp. That brings us to question number 7. We sort of referenced it earlier. How many defensemen will be on the roster for game 1? Like I said, I think you and I both expect that it'll be 8. And I've had conversations with people, and I have tried to gently nudge them to my way of thinking on that, and I'm not getting a lot of buy-in on it. But I will repeat: you and I, employees of the Los Angeles Kings, both anticipate 8 defensemen on the roster to begin the season.
I do. Though the caveat I would have is I think if there is an injury to any of those 8, I wouldn't personally think it would still be 8. I think that's when it could be 14-7.
Yeah.
All goes according to plan. It feels, if all goes according to plan and everyone is good, everyone's healthy, everyone's eligible to play, one player, either a forward or a D, will have to go through waivers, who we all think will be on the roster. It's just 24 for 23 spots. It just, there just seems to be a feeling of 8 defensemen, and I think you and I both agree on that.
Yeah. And I guess we'll leave it at that. I'm going to switch the order of 8 and 9 that I gave you because you mentioned the possibility of players having to go on waivers. And so the next question will be, will the Kings lose any players to waivers? It's not, I know that you think that it's an overblown topic every year. And yet last year, the Kings lost a number of players to waivers. Every team opens themselves up to the possibility every training camp. Mm-hmm. So it's like offer sheets. Everybody says, oh, it never happens. And then until it does, and then everybody makes a big deal out of it. So whether or not the Kings lose anyone to waivers remains to be seen. But I think it's expected that at least one player will be exposed to waivers. Well, actually, more than that, because they have to.
I think 10 to 15 players will be exposed. My problem with waivers is not that it doesn't happen. It totally does. It's not the 50 contract limit, which is made up. My problem with waivers is the commanding, authoritative statement. Oh, you can't put him. He'll get claimed 100%. Mm-hmm. He's definitely getting claimed. I've heard that about so many players who go through with no issue. Just like, oh, no, he'll be claimed for sure. That's my problem with waivers.
Well, and then there's,
they almost never are when it's the claimed for sures.
Well, timing is a huge factor in all of it too, because, there's 32 teams in the National Hockey League, and I'm not intimately familiar with all 32 rosters, but I'm willing to bet that every team has a Jeff Malott Jeff Malott, Jack Studnicka, Joe Hicketts, Caleb Jones. Like, those guys are out there. And so why are you going to take somebody else's version of that player at camp unless you get hit with a spate of injuries, in which case, and there have been times in past years where, was it Copley the first year he was here where they were trying to, or was it Riddick last year where they were trying to find the right day to assign? I think it was Riddick last year, right? Because some team had lost their goalie. And so you're trying to find the right day to assign the goalie, trying to wait out decisions that other teams make. And then sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't, but that is, it's out there. It, like you said, there'll be multiple handfuls of players who have to be assigned to the Ontario Reign as camp goes on. And I think the only player that is not, waiver, I think Brant Clark's the only one who can, the only one expected to make the LA Kings roster. The only one that wouldn't require waivers.
Correct.
Yeah.
You'd think a LaFerrier, but he played too many games last year for waiver purposes. I one rule adjustment I would make is that any player on an entry-level deal should be waiver exempt.
Yeah.
For their 3 years only. But also, I don't want to take away NHL opportunities for players. So maybe I'll
all those rules are there to protect the players. Part of the thing that we forget. But all right. So then the next question: will any invitees earn contracts? Now, I have not yet seen the final camp roster, but every year there are at least a small handful of players who get invited to dev camp, then rookie camp, then main camp. And sometimes they get themselves a contract.
I don't think the Kings will have any invitees in like the traditional sense that we're seeing around the league, like your Tyson Barrie PTO.
Yeah, no.
Guys not expecting
no
anyone like that. We're already talking about a puzzle that has a lot of pieces. There always is the possibility of, and a contract doesn't have to be a Kings deal. It could be an AHL deal with Ontario. It could even be an ECHL deal with Greenville if there's someone who's liked. So possibility, yes. As far as it impacts the big club, I would say no. But there will be that group that you talked about. There will be guys who are Kings draft picks who are not signed per se. I wouldn't call that earning a deal because the Kings would sign them based on their own body of work, not camp specifically, but like there will be a lot of guys here not on contracts.
But let's just say theoretically, I'm looking at the prospect list. I'm trying to find guys that aren't in the NCAA. Let's say
like Jared Woolley.
Yeah. Or I was going to say Matthew Mania. He's a little bit older. Has not yet earned an entry-level contract. Maybe he comes into camp and they look at him and they go, okay, we saw him at dev camp. We saw him at rookie face-off. Now he's coming here. He's given us everything we want. Now we'll sign him to an ELC. We'll still send him back to the, OHL. But, again, just throwing a name out there, there's a handful of guys that would be eligible. Not a lot, though. There's so many NCAA players. In fact, I think the only players currently in the prospect list not in the NCAA and without an entry-level contract are Mania, Celine, and Woolley. And then the three guys in the KHL. So short list of options.
Yeah.
But
top of my head, I can't think of anybody else.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the rest of the guys are
Hero
Jack
Kirsanov.
Hughes. What's that?
Hero
Kirsanov. The
3
three guys in the KHL.
Okay,
Yeah, but Jack Hughes, Jack Sparks, Braden Doyle, who might actually not be here anymore. No, he should be. Jay Reeder, Jared Wright, Ryan Conmey, Kenny Connors, Hampton Slakinski. All those guys are NCAA, so they won't be there. So that brings us to the final question on the list. And that is, you referenced him earlier. What does the future hold for Arthur Kaliyev? What role will he play in the franchise moving forward? And man, I don't know. It's That's why we're asking these questions.
It's a question, right?
Yeah.
And so expecting him to be there.
Yep.
Expecting him to be on the ice.
On day one.
Yep, with the big group. One of the two big groups for day one, as they usually split them up. Upside is still high for me. I think there is a player there. I think you and I both liked how he fit with Phil Deneau and Trevor Moore in that small sample early in the year. I think we could all agree it didn't work in the second half of the year. There has to be a clean slate for this player in order for it to work here. My hope would be that would all be resolved, with the contract. Like if he's signing, he's choosing to come, the team is choosing to retain him. My hope would be that what happened last year was resolved and the player has a fresh start here. And he makes the conversation difficult because we all just kept talking about, there's 23, but now there's 24. Injuries do happen. It's never going to be perfect. But if they don't, Kaliyev is a guy who you shouldn't waive because he has value. He's a good player. And he shouldn't be waived based on his own ability. Like, he should be on the NHL team. So it's going to be interesting. I'm really interested to see where he's deployed during camp, how many preseason games he gets, what roles he is given, because he's still very young and he's got a lot to offer.
This to me is almost the opposite of last season, or like, how you have a photo roll and you have a negative. Like, this is the negative of last season. Last season, going into the season, we knew Arvidsson, Deneau, and Moore were going to be a line. We knew Dubois, Fiala, and Kaliyev would start out as a line, and then Kaliyev got suspended and Arvidsson got injured. And everything we knew was wrong right off the bat. And for the rest of the year, everything we knew that they were only going to have enough cap space for one extra player. Arvidsson's injury gave them room for two. Like, it just everything we knew
got suspended and dressing 11-6 on opening night.
Like, everything we knew was wrong as a result of what happened in training camp. All summer long, we've been talking about these line combinations and looking at the roster and doing the contract math. You've heard it from Rob Blake, and we've heard it from, it's just everybody knew, right? The common, what's the phrase I'm looking for? The conventional wisdom was, okay, these are the line combinations. Now we're looking at day one of camp, and everything we've been talking about for 3 months could wind up being totally wrong.
Totally.
So that's training camp. Training camp is such a funny thing because when your team is good, like when the Kings won the Stanley Cup in 2012, training camp going into 2012, 2013 was not exciting. Was not interesting.
Right.
They brought back almost the same exact team. I can't remember. I think Rob Scuderi might have left that year, but like everybody else was coming back. Like, you're bringing back the same team. And so training camp's not exciting. I always sort of crinkle my nose when people talk about, oh, this training camp, there's going to be so many battles. There's so much drama. It's great. It's exciting. And I'm like, that just means your team is in a state of weird flux and you have no idea what you've got. And that makes me deeply uncomfortable. So, we've said it before earlier in the summer, like, other than Doughty and Anderson as a pair, I don't know what to expect. I am assuming Kemper is the starting goaltender, but I'm not prepared to stake anything of importance on that.
What's funny is I don't feel like there are very many roster battles at this camp. But the lineup could be so many different things.
Minutes,
like a lot of, like the 24 we're talking about feels pretty set.
Yeah.
That's one decision, but like, there's not like.
I'm going to go ahead and read the 24 because we've actually managed to go the entire time without mentioning player 23 or 24, depending on how you want to div it out. So we're talking about Darcy Kemper, David Riddick, Anderson, Doughty, Gavrikov, Spence, Edmondson, Clark, Englund, Burrows, Laferriere, Kopitar, Kempe, Moore, Deneau, Jeannot, Fiala, Byfield, Fogle, Thomas, Turcotte, Lewis, potentially Arthur Kaliyev, and Samuel Fagemo, who, like I said, we've somehow managed to go this entire time without mentioning. And that list doesn't include guys like Jacob Uverari, Caleb Jones, Jeff Hickett's, Jeff Malott, Glenn Godden, Jack Studnicka, who have all played NHL minutes in the past, and guys like Taylor Ward, who was singled out by Marco Sturm as being a player that he quite liked. Yeah. And, I know that there are other people who think that he's got a skill set that might put him near the top of the call-up list. So those are the names that you and I both agree are assuming are the 24 that we're playing with, but I just rambled off 6 or 7, right, that weren't on that list that could easily make, like Joe Hickett's, for example, is a guy that, we never talk about.
Yeah.
But,
has NHL games, plays both sides of the ice.
Right.
Yeah.
He's not a kid either. Like, he can play. He's a veteran. So
look, I agree with you to the extent of there are so many. Last year I saw one final product until something derailed it. This year I could see 10.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know which is the best. I feel like the ingredients are the same for almost all of them, right? But it's, in a positive way. Samuel Fagemo could disrupt the plan. Arthur Kaliyev could disrupt the plan. Alex Turcotte or Akil Thomas could disrupt the plan. Kyle Burrows could disrupt the plan. Like, all these guys could and I use disrupt very positively. Like, they can disrupt the plan by playing well in saying, no, I should be here, not this guy.
Well, and no disrespect intended to Alex Laferriere, but he is penciled in on the top line alongside Kempe and Kopitar. If through experimentation it is discovered that Fagemo has incredible chemistry with Kopitar and Kempe, or Thomas has incredible chemistry, or Turcotte, or anybody, that changes everything. We have Jeannot starting out with Moore and Deneau. But if it turns out that Akil Thomas, a right-handed shot that we know that Deneau prefers to have on his right side, if he is, shows chemistry with the two of them,
or Laferriere does, right?
Yeah. Well, yes, exactly.
That's the beauty for me of guys like Laferriere and what I think Warren Foegele is going to be is I think they have the ability to click in most spots. I think you could put Laferriere right there with those two guys and he'd be good. I think you could put him with Quinton Byfield and Kevin Fiala. He would be good. I think he could be fine with Kopitar. I think he could play on all 4 lines. I think Warren Foegele can do the same thing. So you can move guys like that. If, like you said, if Fagemo says, if he's the clear fit, you can move the other pieces around and they can still be effective.
I do want to also talk about the coaching, because we kind of talked about it a little bit as far as the 11-7 phenomenon from last season. But Jim Hiller, this is his first camp as head coach. He had 34 games last season, but as we've said a number of times, they weren't going to change horses midstream. They weren't going to rework anything. They were, I think it's probably just as important for everybody involved that the Kings make the playoffs this season. So I don't think that the pressure is taken off or anything. The mandate is still in place, but you have a full off season. You have meetings, you have camp, you have an opportunity, you have a new coaching staff than they had in camp last season, right? Trent Yanni is no longer there. And, Jim Hiller's not the power play coach anymore. Newell Brown is. So I don't expect training camp to be totally different, but any differences that we can expect to see in the 82 games after training camp, we'll begin to see in training camp, and that's on the coaching staff to implement.
They're going to do something differently, right? Mm-hmm. Like, Jim was on the podcast with us back when he was hired, said as much. He didn't say, here's the 3 things we're going to do differently, but can't trot out the exact same approach and expect different results. The Kings will change things that they believe will benefit the personnel that they have. We don't know exactly what they're going to be, but we're going to find out soon enough. And I'm expecting changes because we were promised changes. So we got to look out, be mindful of what those are, and see how they go. Most important thing I think you said is the pressure is not gone.
No.
Like, it's still there and it's as high as it was. The runway is just a lot longer. You know, it's not slapped in the middle of a season with 2 practices and away we go. It's a month of camp to work things in. So if you're going to make changes, this is the time to do it. And we'll find out later today what they are.
I'm going to do one bit of looking in the rearview mirror before we wrap this up. We spoke to Marco Sturm before the rookie face-off, excuse me. And he told us that there would be one visible change in how they played from last season, and he challenged us to identify it. I got nothing. I didn't. I didn't. I mean, the games were so unstructured that I think it was really hard to see anything. If I had to guess, I could make one, but I don't have a lot of confidence in it.
I have something in my head of what I thought it was, but I would like to see if the main group does the same thing before I say that it is.
Fair enough.
I think I know, but I would like to.
All right.
I'd like to watch to see if the veterans do the same thing.
We'll revisit that sometime, maybe next week or the week after that. Zach Dooley, thank you as always for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
And Kings fans, training camp will be open to the public if you want to come down and watch. So come on out, check it out. And if you see us, say hi. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon.